Good morning, Shaun. I figured I'd just make you a video real quick about some things about magic. I made out this list so that way you'll have it written down, and I'll go over it real quick. These are some game zones in Commander, just your basic rules of what you need to know as the game goes through. You have your library, that is where your 99 cards go, with single names. Your command zone, this is where your commander goes and was what your deck, your library is built out of. Now, whenever they die, you can put them back with an additional cost to play them again. So if something happens to your commander, it can go back, but then you'll never lose your commander basically, because that's what your deck, your library is built around. Then you have your hand. These are the cards that you hold and you can be played at the correct time, and they're only known to you typically. Graveyard. This is where something goes whenever it dies or whenever it's done. But this zone, a lot of different cards can reference the zone and do a lot of weird stuff with it, like pulling creatures or spells from the graveyard. And then exile usually means it's gone forever. If something gets exiled, it's typically never going to come back. Now, sometimes there are cards that reference exile, but that's very, very rare. The stack is a little complicated, and you'll understand it more when we play it. But whenever you play a spell, it goes to this zone first, and it allows all the players to react to it before it goes to play or the battlefield. And this was the easiest. It's just where all the permanents exist. Just all your cards that you've played, like your creatures, that's just where they are. That's where most of the action happens. It's simple. So that's easy zones. These are abilities. Your deck is more about creature abilities, so that's what there's hundreds of abilities references that I could have named, but these are the main ones that you need to worry about, and every Magic player, whenever they see that, they know what it means. Flying is very simple. It just means that creatures can't block this one unless it has flying or reach, and reach means it can block flyers. You can think of like a dragon is flying, but then an archer would have reach, so that way it can shoot the dragon if it needed to. So it's very simple. Vigilance just means normally whenever a creature attacks, you have to tap it, and that's a tap ability. That's a tap symbol. But with this ability, they don't have to tap whenever they attack, and we'll go over attacking as well. Death touch. I know your commander has death touch. And that means any amount of damage dealt by this creature to another creature will kill it, even if it's just 1 damage. So you could have a really big, crazy dragon creature that's, attacking you. It could be a 25-25, whatever. And if you have just little 1/1 with death touch, and say he had reach because that dragon had flying, if he has reach and death touch and he just won, he can kill that huge dragon. Haste is another one that your commander has, and normally whenever a creature comes out into the battlefield, it cannot attack as soon as it does, as soon as it comes into play. But this ability, this allows your opponents to react to your creatures before you attack with them. But with haste, just screw all that, play your creature and attack. Trample is another big one that your deck does. Your commander doesn't have it, but I put a lot of cards in there that has trample because it's a very good ability. Normally, whenever 2 creatures collide, when 2 creatures collide, these are 2 creature cards. So let's say this one had trample. Another card gave it trample. Whenever they collide, he's attacking this player. He has 7 attack, that's power, and then toughness is the back one, which is a defense. So 7, 4, and so that means if this creature blocked him, he would only absorb 3 of the damage, but then whatever's left over, which is 4, would go to the player that this creature controls. So this one will die, and then the player will take the rest of it. Now what's interesting about your commander is you have Death Touch as well, which means if he had Death Touch and Trample, only one of these damages has to go here for it to kill it, and then the rest, which would be 6, would go to the player. And that is what your deck synergizes on, getting your commander big because he has Death Touch, and getting him even bigger because he has Trample. Very two of the main abilities that you have. And I think he has Vigilance too, which is not bad. So those are the abilities that you really need to know, but you'll understand more when you play. A few more abilities that your deck doesn't really do, but you just need to be aware of them, is Indestructible. Means it can't die by normal circumstances. Hexproof means that there are spells and abilities that can target creatures or any permanent really, and we'll go over permanents in a second on the battlefield. With this effect, your opponents cannot target that permanent. So if you have hexproof on your things, your opponents can't do nothing to target it, to try to mess with you. Shroud is basically the same thing, only it includes you as well. Nobody can target that permanent, which can be annoying, but some people like just to be safe. Now we're going to go over some card types. This is your typical card with their name in a commander format. You can only have one card with one name in any of them. So you can only have one of these cards. This is the mana cost ability. It is 2 generic, which means any color can be paid for it, and a blue. It is a creature, so it's going to have a power and toughness. And these are subtypes. You don't really have to pay a whole lot of attention to those unless other cards reference them. So this is a human pirate. Now, no matter what the art shows, this is what matters. So if it said like a soldier, but it was obviously a human soldier, if it doesn't say human right here, the card is technically not human. Then you have this ability down here, which means to pay 1 mana of any color and tap it, which means turn it sideways. And then after this colon, you do whatever it does, whatever it says to do. Draw a card and then discard a card. It's very simple. And this is what an activated ability looks like. They'll always have a colon. Now, I'm trying to look for a triggered ability. Here's another form of activated ability. This is one of my favorite creature cards. He's awesome. He's a 1/1, so he's small, but he has a really good ability. It says sacrifice, secure a tribe elder, which is his name. And then there's a colon right there. And then you do whatever. So after you sacrifice it, which means throw him to the graveyard. Search your library for a basic land card, put it into the battlefield tapped, and then shuffle your library. And typically this is what basic lands look like. So if he was in my hand and I wanted to play him, and let's say it's turn 2, so he's in my hand, and I have another land in hand, I can go ahead and play the second land. Now that I have 2, I can tap these 2 and play him out onto the battlefield. And he's a 1/1 creature, so I can use him to attack if I wanted to. Of course, not on this turn because he doesn't have haste. But I could also use his ability anytime I wanted to, because the only abilities that stop you with summoning sickness is tap abilities. So if I were to play this creature, let's say I had these two lands and this land, I can tap these two to pay for the two generic because it doesn't matter. Then I can tap this one, which does give me a blue, and then I could play this one. Now I cannot do his ability immediately because of that tap symbol. That means whenever a creature has summoning sickness, you cannot tap or attack, which means this is typically a more powerful ability than this ability, typically speaking. Now there are several different colors of cards. You have your green cards, then you have your black cards, which has black symbols, your blue cards, red cards, and I don't think I picked up a white card. I did not pick up a white card. White cards have a sundial on it. Now, funny things about colors. This is a colorless permanent because it doesn't require any colors to tap for it. Now, there are some colorless cards that require colorless mana, which is that pip right there. That little diamond. That means I have to pay some sort of colorless. And this permanent right here does add a colorless, which that's that little pip right there. So I could tap this to be able to generate some mana to get to my colorless right there. Now, not all lands are just your typical basic, like this one right here. Sometimes they come with abilities. It says when this card, which is its name, Memorial of Genius, enters the battlefield tapped. So whenever you play this card, it enters sideways. So you can't even use it whenever it first comes out. But next turn, you can untap it and add blue, which is basically like a typical island card. But it also has a activated ability, which you can see by that colon. So it says pay 4 and a blue, which is 5 total mana, tap it, and then sacrifice it, which means get rid of it to draw 2 cards. Here is another land, and you can tell these are lands by the card type. So this card type is basic land, which means you can have as many of them in your deck as you want because they are basic. And this is a land, and this is also a land, but it also has a subtype of desert. Which, I mean, the subtypes don't really matter a whole lot. So whenever it enters the battlefield tapped, just like this one, usually powerful lands do that. When this card, which is its name, enters the battlefield, it deals 1 damage to target opponent. So that's just a little extra. But it also has a tapped ability, which says add green or white, which that's that little white symbol I was talking about earlier. So this card and this card could not be in your mono green deck because only green cards could ever be in your green deck. But seeing that these have blue symbols on them, they cannot be in your green deck. All right, so that's lands for you. And we went over creatures. And we went over how creatures can attack. 1 attack. So let's say I have a 2/3, and he wanted to attack the guy with the Secure Tribe Elder. He would tap it, and then the guy with the Secure Tribe Elder would say, I don't want to take 2 damage. I'll go ahead and say I'll block with the Secure Tribe Elder 2 damage will be dealt to the Elder, which he only has 1 toughness, meaning he will die and go to the graveyard. That's simple. Now, the defender could say, I want to keep my snake shaman, and say, well, okay, well, then that means this creature is going to go straight to the opponent. So that's how creatures, and they basically attack. Now, sometimes cards can be old. I'm not sure if you have any, but they'll just say summon hound, and that's a lot different than what the new cards say, creature, and then subtype. Sometimes, so summon means creature, because it's an older card, so it has old text, and it's been changed over the years. So what this really says, instead of shaman hound, it says summon hound, it says creature. It'll have a dash, and it says hounds. So just be aware of older cards like that. And he says he's not affected by summoning sickness, which means he has haste. And whenever he comes into play, it deals 4 damage to you. So not a very good card at all. A lot of old cards are really bad. But this is a triggered ability, because you can see by the comma right there. So when this thing happens, that means this thing happens. So when Lava Hounds come into play, so whenever he finally hits the battlefield, it will deal 4 damage to you, which means you'll take 4 damage. Back in the day, paying 4 mana for a 4/4 was really good, so they decided to have you take 4 damage. And so that's old cards, old creature cards. The next thing that I would like to talk about is enchantments. So enchantments is another type of permanent that stays on the battlefield, and this particular enchantment has 2 activated abilities, and you can activate them anytime that you can satisfy the cost, which this is just a green, which means pay a green mana into it. Target creature lose flying. So pay green, target a creature, it loses flying. Easy. And you can sacrifice this card called Downdraft, and it deals 2 damage to each creature with flying. So it's kind of like a board wipe for flyers, if you don't have a lot of flyers. So that's enchantments. Here is a creature with 2 creature types. You've already seen him before. He's legendary, which means he can be your commander, and he's a creature. All this text down here, don't even worry about it. If a creature has this much text, and that means if you see an opponent play something with this much text, just have them explain what it does. That's all I can say about that. Cards can get very complicated, and there's no way you're going to know every single card, so don't even worry about it. You've seen this card before. It's the one that has no color. This is also colorless, which is, I guess, technically the 6th color. 5 colors being actual colors, and then 1 being colorless. This one is an artifact, which means it's another permanent that sticks on the battlefield until it's removed. And it has a static ability, which says whenever you cast a spell with X in its mana cost, you can put 2 charge counters onto it. And counters are very interesting because they can be any kind of counter. They can be +1/+1, which means if he had a +1/+1 counter on him, it's a physical, you can put a physical dice on him to represent that. But it's a physical thing that attaches to permanents, and it will increase the power and toughness. And a +1/+1 counter can be put on this card, but seeing that he's not a creature, he wouldn't really be able to use the power buff. But he's putting charge counters onto himself. And he references charge counters down here. You can tap it at 1 colorless for each charge counter on this card, and you can only spend that mana for X spells. So it's an interesting card. can be sometimes complicated, but as long as you just read it, it should explain what it does. And counters are just little, that's why I gave you so many dice, so that way you can keep up with how many of each counter is on whatever permanent you have on the battlefield. Okay, we have an enchantment, but the subtype is aura, which means this cannot exist by itself on the battlefield. It has to be attached to a, in this case, enchant creature. And so it says enchanted creature gets +2/+2 and is goaded. Don't worry about goaded, it's not very popular. Whenever enchanted creature attacks, scry 2. So that's the ability that this enchantment gives to that creature. So let's say I like Secure Tribe Elder. Let's say you had Secure Tribe Elder out, and you wanted to enchant a Secure Tribe Elder with a +2/+2, which notably are not counters. It's the enchantment itself giving +2/+2. That means Secure Tribe Elder would be a big old 3/3 now. So if somebody killed Secure Tribe Elder, he goes to the graveyard. This is an enchantment aura, which means it cannot exist by itself, would also go to the graveyard. Now there are some cases where they don't want to kill the creature, they'll just kill the enchantment, which would go to the graveyard just the same, but then he can exist by himself, which is just fine. He would stay out on the battlefield. Okay, so let's go with some kill. How are these opponents killing our creatures? One way that they can kill the creatures is with a card called an instant, which means even though it's my turn, my opponents can cast this card anytime that they have priority. It says basically they can cast this at any time. So if Secure Tribe Elder, they didn't like him, they can cast this instant spell as long as they pay for that 1 black. It says target creature gets -2 until end of turn. And if Secure Tribe Elder has -2, that means he's at -1. And creatures cannot live with -1 life. So they would go to the graveyard. This particular instant has a reference to the graveyard. You can pay 4, which is 3 of any color, and 1 black, exile this card from your graveyard, and it says the ring tempts you, which is another ability that you don't really have to worry about. Like if any of these things reference weird things that you don't understand, just ask the person what it does and they'll explain it. Like I said, you're not going to know everything. Another way, remember whenever I referenced the stack earlier? So let's say I have this Secure Tribe Elder and I really like him, but my opponent casts this -2/-2. The guy who owns the Secure Tribe Elder can respond to this while it's on the stack before it hits my Secure Tribe Elder. So while this is on the stack, I can put my own instances onto the stack, which can be this blue one. As long as I have the mana to play it, I can play it, and it says counter target non-creature spell. And so I'm going to target this non-creature because it's not a creature spell. And that means countering means getting rid of, removing it from the stack. So if this one resolves, as it resolves, it'll remove this one from the stack, which means just going to the graveyard. This one will also go to the graveyard. And that means my Secure Tribe Elder stays on the battlefield. There is another card type called Sorcery. Now, this plays out a lot like an instant, that it just goes to the stack, does the thing that it says it does, and then goes to the graveyard. It does not go to the battlefield at all. And as long as you have the mana for it, and usually sorceries can only be played on your turn and cannot be played like an instant, like any time. It'll say, this one says scry 3, which again, that's a weird terminology, scrying, so just ask what it means. It's not a big deal. Scrying is not a big deal, so it's not one of the ones I'd let you know. Then reveal the top card of your library, and if that card is a creature card, draw that card. It's a pretty good thing. This card's a pretty good one. This little symbol doesn't really matter in Commander a whole lot. It kind of shows how rare it is, how many printings there are. So if it's this black one, like you see right there and right there and right there, that means they printed a ton of them. But that doesn't mean they're not good. This card is amazing, even though it's a common print. And in my opinion, this card is kind of crappy, even though it's an uncommon print. You might be able to see that slight silver right there in its printing. This one's really crappy. I don't like this card at all, because I usually don't play X spells, but there's not a whole lot of printings of them because it's in a gold symbol. And then you have cards like this that are an orange symbol, and that means this is mythic rare. And this is a very good card as a commander, just because of that ability right there that takes a whole book to even, a whole speech to even tell you what it does. But I don't necessarily like him because he's so complicated. I like simple things like this one right here. Once you play Magic, you're going to see a lot of these guys. I think you have one in your deck. He's very good. All right. We got one enchantment here that has a static ability. It says, so it's an enchantment, so it will stay on the battlefield for as long as it doesn't ever get removed. It says creatures can't attack you unless that player pays 2 for each attacking creature you control. So if I have a Secure Tribe Elder and he's just itching to attack, I have to have that 2 generic mana to be able to attack that opponent. This card stops a lot of people from attacking you. It's amazing. Unfortunately, it's in blue, so I could not put it in your deck, or I would have. I like propaganda a lot. You have one of these in your deck. These are very uncommon types of enchantments. These are sagas. And if you just read that right there, it'll kind of tell you how it works. The first ability will happen immediately as soon as it comes out. And then the second ability will happen on your next turn. The third ability will happen on your next turn. And the fourth ability, after it resolves, the saga's done and will go to your graveyard. So it's not complicated. It's just rare that you see sagas. They're not a very common card. Here is a strange card. Now, we're not going to worry about anything down here. I just wanted to point out some of the mana symbol pips. You have a blue and a green and a generic, but then you have one that's kind of like both green and blue right there. That means you can put green or blue into it. So to be able to play that card, you'll need a green, untapped mana, one of any color, so you can use that mountain if you needed to. Where is that blue one? You'll need this blue one, but then you will need one of green or blue. So you can use another forest, but in Commander, you'll see this land a lot, and it is Command Tower. Command Tower has that tapped ability, which all lands have. Even if you don't see that tapped ability, that land has that tapped ability. It's just, if it's a forest, then it has that ability. It's kind of one of those things that are just, on the old cards, they had that tap thing, but they just want, they think it, Magic the Gathering thinks it's prettier just to have nothing there. But with Command Tower, it has that tapped ability like all lands should have. It says add 1 mana of any color in your commander's identity. So, let's say I'm looking for legendary. Here we go. Let's say this guy is our commander. He's a legendary creature, and his color identity is green and blue, but his commander identity is anything that has a color pip anywhere on the card. What I mean by that is, so this has green in its casting cost. He also has green in his activated cost. And if a card has a different color in its activated cost, then I did not bring a card to reference that. So this card could technically have red down here. It would still be a green card, but if it had red down here, then its commander identity would be green and red, not necessarily its card identity. And so if this had a red pip down here in one of its abilities, that means its commander identity would be green, blue, and red, even though it doesn't have any red up here. But with this tower, if this was our commander, we can tap it for green or blue because it's part of its identity to be able to play, to be able to pay for any of these mana pips that we're missing right here. So if we had a green and a red and a blue and a command tower, we could pay the red to the generic because it doesn't matter, the green to the green, the blue to the blue or green, well the blue to the blue, and then the command tower to any of them that we're missing. So that's how you would play that. All cards are played on your turn except for instances. Instances are the only ones that are kind of weird. And the one instance that you really have to worry about in your deck is stuff like these two right here. So you have instances like this, not this exact one. Play at instant speed, which means you can react to whatever your opponents are doing. So let's say somebody's trying to kill your commander, which is this one right here. You can play this that says target creature you control gets +1/+1, which means now it's a 5/5, and gains hexproof until end of turn. So that means nobody can target it, and it's a 5/5 until end of turn. Then it has a little text saying the ring tempts you, but which doesn't matter. Another thing that you have in there are cards like this right here that can be played at instant speed. So let's say you only have your commander out and somebody's attacking you with a ton of creatures and you can only block one of them, but that means you're going to be taking like 30, 40, 50 damage. Well, with this one card, it says prevent all combat damage that will be dealt this turn. That means all those attackers that are coming at you are not going to do any damage. It doesn't matter. So these are the two types of cards, that instant cards, that are going to be in your deck. You have protective spells and fog abilities, which the only reason I call it basically prevent combat damage abilities. Man, I guess that's pretty much it. We went over how to play spells, the different card types, definitions. Well, I suppose if you have any questions or concerns, you're gonna let me know. There's another picture of my babies. See ya, Shaun.